Special Ops General asked a single dad waiter his rank as a joke. Then Force Commander shook him. He thought he was teasing a tired night shift waiter. But when the man straightened, looked him dead in the eye, and answered, "Force Commander, sir," the whole diner went silent, because this wasn't just a joke. This was a soldier who'd once led men through hell, now fighting a war no one could see. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights of Mel's diner hummed softly in the late-night quiet. Danny Morales wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night, his movements precise and methodical. The familiar scent of coffee and grilled onions hung in the air as the clock on the wall ticked past 1:15 a.m. His cell phone buzzed in his pocket. A small smile softened his tired features as he saw Sophie's name on the screen. Stepping into the kitchen, where it was quieter, he answered, "Hey, sweetheart, shouldn't you be asleep? I finished my book report, Dad." Sophie's excited voice came through. "Mrs. Martinez helped me with the spelling." Danny leaned against the stainless steel prep table. "That's great, honey. But you know tomorrow's a school day." I know. I just wanted to tell you." There was a rustling sound, then Mrs. Martinez's voice in the background gently urging Sophie to bed. "Get some rest, okay? I'll see you in the morning. Love you." "Love you too, Dad." Danny slipped the phone back into his pocket, his heart both warmed and heavy. Sophie's voice always brightened his darkest hours, but it also reminded him of everything he couldn't give her. A proper home. A normal schedule. A father who didn't have to work nights just to make ends meet. The bell above the diner door chimed. Danny straightened his apron and returned to the counter, where 3 truckers nursed their coffees and a young couple shared a plate of fries in a corner booth. The new customer was an older gentleman, tall and distinguished despite the late hour, wearing pressed khakis and a polo shirt that suggested comfort with authority. "Evening, sir," Danny greeted, automatically reaching for a menu. "Coffee?" The man nodded, settling onto a stool at the counter. "Black, please." His voice carried the crisp tone of someone used to giving orders. He studied Danny with sharp eyes as the coffee was poured. "You're new here." "6 months, sir." Danny set down the coffee pot. "What can I get you?" "The special will do." The man's gaze hadn't wavered. "Frank Halloway." He introduced himself, extending his hand. Danny shook it firmly. "Danny Morales, sir. I'll get that order in for you." As Danny moved to place the order with the kitchen, he could feel Halloway watching him. It was a familiar sensation, the assessment of a superior officer sizing up a soldier. Danny had experienced it countless times before. In another life, he brought Halloway's meal, a classic breakfast of eggs, bacon, and hash browns. The older man took a bite, then set down his fork. "Military?" he asked casually. Danny's spine stiffened slightly. "Yes, sir." "Thought so." The posture gives it away. Halloway's eyes crinkled with amusement. "And you keep calling me sir like you mean it." A ghost of a smile crossed Danny's face as he refilled the coffee. Hard habit to break. "What branch?" "Special operations, sir." Danny kept his voice neutral, hoping the answer would satisfy. Halloway's eyebrows rose slightly. He took another bite, chewed thoughtfully, then dabbed his mouth with a napkin. "You know, son, I spent 40 years in the service myself. Made it to general before they finally pushed me out to pasture." His tone was light, but his eyes were shrewd. "What's your rank, soldier?" The question hung in the air. Danny's hands stilled on the coffee pot. For a moment, the diner seemed to fade away, replaced by memories of helicopter rotors and radio, static, of decisions made in split seconds that echoed through years. "Force Commander, sir," he answered finally, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. The change in Halloway's expression was subtle but immediate. His fork clattered against the plate. The title Force Commander wasn't just any rank. It belonged to an elite unit, one whose missions were classified and whose very existence was rarely acknowledged. The general's casual demeanor vanished, replaced by intense scrutiny. He studied Danny's face as if seeing him for the first time, noting the controlled strength in his bearing, the careful way he held himself, the shadows behind his eyes that spoke of battles fought far from any recognized battlefield. Neither man spoke for a long moment. The sounds of the diner seemed to fade. The soft clink of dishes, the murmur of tired conversations, the sizzle of the grill, all became background to the weight of unspoken understanding between them. Holloway finished his meal in thoughtful silence. When Danny brought the check, the general placed several large bills on the counter. Far more than the meal cost. "Keep the change," he said quietly, standing up. His earlier joviality was gone, replaced by something more solemn. He paused before leaving, looking as if he wanted to say more, but instead just nodded and turned toward the door. Through the large windows, Danny watched as Holloway stood in the parking lot, keys in hand, staring back at the diner. The general's car remained idle for several long minutes before finally pulling away into the night, taillights disappearing slowly into the darkness. Danny returned to his tasks, but his movements were more mechanical now, his mind drawn back to memories he'd worked hard to bury. He glanced at his phone, at the picture of Sophie's smiling face on the screen, and drew a deep breath. The past was the past. He had a different mission now. One little girl who needed him to stay focused on the present, on keeping their small world stable and safe. The fluorescent lights continued their quiet hum as the night shift wore on, but something had shifted in the air of Mel's diner. Like the ripples from a stone dropped in still water, the brief encounter between the veteran-turned-waiter and the retired general had set something in motion, though neither man could yet know exactly what. The next evening, rain pattered against the diner's windows, creating silvery streaks that caught the glow of the neon signs. Danny methodically restocked sugar packets at the counter, his movements carrying the same precision he'd shown in everything else. The bell above the door chimed softly. General Holloway stepped inside, shaking droplets from his coat. His eyes scanned the nearly empty diner before settling on Danny. Without hesitation, he made his way to the counter and took a seat in Danny's section. "Evening, sir," Danny said, already reaching for the coffee pot. "Regular or decaf?" "Regular. Black as midnight." The general's weathered face crinkled into a slight smile. "Quiet night." "Yes, sir. Rain keeps folks home." Danny poured the coffee with a steady hand, then placed a menu in front of the general. "Special tonight is meatloaf." The general waved the menu away. "Just coffee for now." He studied Danny over the rim of his cup. "Force commander, you said yesterday. That's not a common rank." Danny's shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly. "Like I said, it's in the past." He busied himself, wiping an already clean section of counter. "What matters now is Sophie." "Sophie?" The general's tone was careful, inviting but not pushing. A genuine warmth crossed Danny's face. He reached for his wallet and pulled out a slightly worn photograph. "My daughter. She's 9. The general accepted the photo carefully. It showed a bright-eyed girl with her father's dark hair and gentle smile, holding up a science fair ribbon. "Beautiful child. She looks happy. She's everything." Danny's voice softened. "Smart, too. Top of her class in math and science. Her mother must be proud." Danny's expression flickered. "Maria passed away when Sophie was 3. Cancer." He said it matter-of-factly, but his hand tightened on the rag he was holding. The general nodded solemnly. "I'm sorry, son." Danny tucked the photo away carefully. "We manage. Sophie's strong, like her mother was. Must be challenging, raising her alone. We get by." Danny glanced at the clock, then started preparing for the early morning regulars. "Got the trailer rent covered, usually. Between here and the warehouse job, we make it work." The general watched as Danny moved efficiently through his tasks. 2 jobs? That's a heavy load. Sophie needs stability. And school supplies aren't getting cheaper. Danny's slight smile held no bitterness, just determination. She's worth every minute of it. Rain continued to drum against the windows as the night deepened. The general nursed his coffee, watching Danny serve the occasional customer with quiet dignity. There was something in the way he carried himself, a vigilance that never quite relaxed, even in the most mundane moments. As dawn approached, painting the wet parking lot in pale gray light, the general observed Danny's practiced routine of closing tasks. Each movement was economical, purposeful, like a man who'd learned to make every action count. Danny wiped down the counter one final time as the general stood to leave. The older man paused, watching the methodical motion of Danny's hands. Under his breath, barely audible above the soft patter of rain, he muttered, "That man's been through war. I'd stake my medals on it." Sunday morning light streamed through the trailer's small windows, casting warm patches on the worn linoleum floor. Danny stood at the tiny stove, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides of the cramped kitchen as he flipped pancakes with practiced care. The sweet smell of butter and maple syrup filled their modest home. "Hey, Sophie Bug, these are almost ready," Danny called out, smiling as he heard the shuffle of sock-covered feet coming down the narrow hallway. Sophie appeared, her dark hair still tousled from sleep, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. "They smell amazing, Daddy." She climbed onto one of the mismatched chairs at their small folding table, which was already set with plates and forks. Their trailer might have been small, but it was filled with love. Sophie's artwork covered nearly every available wall space: crayon drawings of animals, watercolor landscapes, and carefully written poems stuck with colorful magnets. A string of paper hearts, a craft project from school, zigzagged across the living room ceiling. Danny placed 3 perfectly golden pancakes on Sophie's plate, arranged in a Mickey Mouse shape that made her giggle.
"Extra special Sunday pancakes for my extra special girl. You always say that."
Sophie grinned, drowning her breakfast in syrup. "Because it's always true." Danny sat down with his own plate, watching his daughter dig in with enthusiasm. These quiet moments were what he lived for now. After breakfast, they headed to Memorial Park, just a few blocks from their trailer. The morning was bright and crisp, perfect for their weekly tradition. Sophie skipped ahead on the sidewalk, stopping every few feet to examine interesting rocks or fallen leaves. At the playground, Danny settled onto their usual bench, while Sophie joined a few other kids on the swings. He kept a watchful eye, as always, but his posture was relaxed here. This was their sanctuary. "Higher, Daddy," Sophie called out. Danny walked over and gave her gentle pushes, each one carefully measured. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "A veterinarian," Sophie declared proudly, pumping her legs. "I'm going to help all the animals, even the scary ones. They just need someone to be nice to them." Danny's heart swelled with pride. "You've got such a big heart, sweetheart. You'll be amazing at it." Sophie jumped off the swing at its apex, landing with the natural grace of childhood. She turned to him with sudden seriousness. "Will you always be there to see me do it?" Danny knelt down to her level, meeting her eyes. "Sophie, I promise you this. I will always, always be here for you. Nothing in this world could take me away from you." She threw her arms around his neck, and he held her close, breathing in the sweet smell of her strawberry shampoo. Later that morning, they walked to the Little Hope Baptist Church, their shoes clicking on the sidewalk. Danny had pressed his only dress shirt for the occasion, and Sophie wore her favorite yellow sundress. The congregation welcomed them warmly, though Danny couldn't miss the familiar undercurrent of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Mrs. Peterson patted his arm with grandmotherly affection, while her husband nodded stiffly from a distance. As they settled into their usual pew near the back, Danny's mind drifted to that last mission, unbidden memories surfacing like shadows in clear water. The classified operation in that remote village. the intelligence that had been wrong, the civilians who'd been there when they shouldn't have been. His team had followed orders, but the cost. "Danny, would you like to help with the collection plate, Mrs.?" Peterson's gentle voice pulled him back to the present. "Of course, ma'am." He stood, grateful for the distraction. Through the service, he noticed the usual mix of reactions from the townspeople, genuine warmth from some, barely concealed curiosity from others. They'd all heard different versions of why he'd left the military, each story more dramatic than the last. Danny let them wonder. The truth was his to carry. That evening, after a simple dinner of mac and cheese, Sophie's favorite, they went through their bedtime routine. Sophie was already in her pajamas, teeth brushed. When she asked the question, "Did you ever save anyone, Daddy?" Danny paused in the middle of tucking her in, his hand stilling on her colorful quilt. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken weight. He looked at his daughter's innocent face, those trusting eyes that saw him only as her hero, not as the man who still woke up some nights in a cold sweat. Finally, he leaned down and kissed her forehead gently. "Once or twice," he said softly. The morning sun beat down on Danny's neck as he trimmed the thick hedges outside City Hall. Sweat dripped from his forehead, but he kept a steady rhythm with the electric trimmer. This landscaping job wasn't glamorous, but it helped make ends meet between his night shifts at Mel's. 2 city workers in bright orange vests stood nearby, taking a coffee break. Their voices carried over the buzz of Danny's trimmer. "Yeah, heard old Mel's finally calling it quits," one said, taking a sip from his thermos. "Shame." About the diner. Danny's hands froze on the trimmer. He pretended to adjust the power cord, listening more closely. "Can't blame him. Man's worked that grill for what, 30 years?" the other worker replied. "Developer's been eyeing that corner lot for ages." The trimmer hung heavy in Danny's hands. Mel's was his main source of income, the job that let him work nights while Sophie slept. His mind raced with calculations, rent, utilities, Sophie's school supplies. When his shift ended at noon, Danny drove straight to the diner. The lunch rush was in full swing, but Mel stood behind the counter, as always, calling orders to the kitchen with his familiar gruff voice. "Got a minute, Mel?" Danny asked, his throat tight. Mel's weathered face softened. He gestured toward the back office, away from curious ears. The small room smelled of coffee and old paperwork, its walls covered in yellowing photographs of the diner through the decades. "You heard, huh?" Mel said, settling into his creaky desk chair. "Is it true? You're selling?" Mel nodded slowly. "End of next month. Doctor's been on my case about slowing down." He met Danny's eyes. "Meant to tell you myself, son. Just couldn't find the right time." Danny's chest tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "I understand. You've earned your retirement." "Listen, Danny, it's okay, Mel. Really." Danny managed a small smile. "Just glad I heard it from you." Back home, Danny sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by newspaper want ads and his monthly budget notebook. The numbers refused to add up. His phone buzzed. Sophie's teacher. "Mr. Morales, this is Mrs. Henderson. Just wanted to remind you about next week's field trip to the Science Museum. The permission slip and $30 fee are due Wednesday." Danny's pen pressed hard against the paper. Of course. Sophie's really looking forward to it. Wonderful. She's been so excited about the dinosaur exhibit. After hanging up, Danny stared at the collection of small bills in his wallet. $27. He'd have to wait until Friday's landscaping check for the rest. The electricity bill could wait another week. That night at Mel's, Danny moved through his shift on autopilot. The familiar rhythm of taking orders and refilling coffee cups couldn't distract him from the weight in his chest. He'd already called 3 other diners about openings, but none needed night staff. General Holloway came in at his usual time, settling into his regular booth. Danny brought his coffee without being asked. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world tonight, son," the general observed, his sharp eyes studying Danny's face. "Just tired, sir. The usual. Nonsense. I've seen you work doubles without breaking stride. The general set down his coffee cup. Something's eating at you. Danny hesitated, then slid into the booth across from him. The diner was empty except for a truck driver dozing at the counter. Mel's retiring, selling the place next month. Danny's voice was quiet. I'll figure something out. Always do. And Sophie? Danny's jaw tightened. She won't notice anything's wrong. I'll make sure of it. The general's expression softened slightly. Pride's a heavy burden to carry alone, Force Commander. This isn't about pride, sir. Danny stood up, straightening his apron. It's about taking care of what matters. Later that night, after the last customer had gone and the floors were mopped, Danny walked to his truck under a starless sky. He didn't notice the general's car still parked in the shadows of the lot. Inside his vehicle, General Holloway pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. The line rang twice before a familiar voice answered. It's Holloway, the general said, watching Danny's taillights disappear down the dark street. I need you to run a name for me. Danny Morales. Get me everything. There was a pause on the line. Everything, sir? That's what I said. The general's voice was firm. And I mean everything. The evening settled over Mel's diner like a heavy blanket, bringing with it the familiar rhythm of clinking plates and quiet conversations. General Holloway pushed through the glass door at his usual time, the weight of a manila folder pressing against his chest from inside his coat pocket. His weathered face held a different expression tonight. Less curious, more determined. Danny was wiping down the counter when he noticed the general's arrival. Evening, sir. Coffee? He asked, already reaching for the pot. Please. The general settled onto his regular stool, watching Danny's precise movements. The diner was nearly empty, save for an elderly couple in the corner booth sharing a slice of pie. Rough day? Danny asked, noting the deep creases around the general's eyes. Sometimes the past weighs heavier than others, Holloway replied, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. You know about that, don't you, son? Danny's hand paused mid-wipe on the counter. His shoulders tensed slightly, but he kept his voice steady. We all have our burdens, sir. Operation Sandstorm, the general said quietly. That was yours, wasn't it? The color drained from Danny's face. He glanced at the elderly couple, then back at the general. Let me get Jimmy to cover the counter for a few minutes. They moved to a corner booth, far from any prying ears. Danny sat with his back straight, hands folded on the table, his posture betraying his military training. How did you know? Danny asked. I didn't, not for certain, but I recognized the look in your eyes. It's the same one I see in the mirror. The general took a long sip of his coffee. Tell me about it, son. Not as your superior, just as someone who understands. Danny's fingers traced invisible patterns on the table's surface. It was supposed to be simple. A humanitarian extraction, getting civilians out of a combat zone. We'd done it dozens of times before. His voice grew distant, lost in the memory. There were children in the convoy, families. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Danny continued. We had intel about insurgent activity in the area, but nothing concrete. My team was the best. We could handle anything. That's what I thought anyway. Mike Thompson was my second in command, known him since basic. He was getting married that summer. The general remained silent, letting Danny find his words. The ambush came out of nowhere. Professional job. They knew exactly where we'd be. Mike. Danny's voice cracked slightly. Mike spotted the shooter first. He pushed me down, took the round that was meant for me. You got the civilians out, the general said softly. It wasn't a question. Every last one. But, Mike, Danny shook his head. They wanted to give me a commendation. Said I showed exceptional leadership under fire. But I couldn't accept it. Not when Mike's fiancée was planning his funeral instead of their wedding. So you left, the general finished. Took a dishonorable, Colonel Braxton tried to talk me out of it, but I couldn't stay. Couldn't face it. Danny's eyes fixed on some distant point. They cleaned up my record later, quietly. But by then, I was already gone. The general nodded slowly, then surprised Danny by sharing his own story. My son, David, was in Afghanistan, 10th Mountain Division. His voice grew rough. I pulled strings to get him the safest posting possible. Thought I could protect him even from halfway around the world. Danny watched as the usually stoic general's facade cracked slightly. IED took him. Random road. Random day. All my influence, all my rank, meant nothing. Holloway's fingers tightened around his coffee mug. My wife, she couldn't bear to look at me afterward. Said I reminded her too much of him. We divorced 6 months later. The diner's ambient sounds filled the heavy silence between them. The soft whir of the ceiling fans, the distant clatter from the kitchen, the muted conversations of other patrons. Sophie's mother? The general asked gently. Car accident. 3 years ago. Danny replied. Nothing dramatic. Just life. Is that why you work so hard? 2 jobs. Long hours. Danny managed a small smile. Sophie deserves everything I can give her. And more. The general reached across the table, placing a hand on Danny's shoulder. You're a good man, Morales. Mike Thompson would be proud of who you've become. Danny's eyes glistened, but he quickly blinked away the moisture. Thank you, sir. The rest of the evening passed in comfortable silence, broken only by occasional small talk about Sophie's school activities and the general's gardening hobby. When closing time came, they parted with a firmer handshake than usual. In his car, parked under a flickering street lamp, General Holloway finally pulled out the manila folder. His eyes moved methodically over the contents. Mission reports, commendations, witness statements. Everything matched Danny's story perfectly. Then, at the bottom of the stack, he found it. A sealed envelope. Never opened, never delivered. The letterhead bore Colonel Braxton's name, and across the front was written, Letter of Recommendation. Force Commander Daniel Morales. The general stared at the envelope for a long moment before carefully returning everything to the folder. The street lamp cast long shadows across his face as he sat there, lost in thought, while the diner's lights slowly winked out behind him. The fluorescent lights of Mel's Diner cast their familiar glow across the half-empty parking lot. It was Danny's last shift, and the place felt different tonight. The usual warmth had drained away, leaving behind something hollow and tired. Only 3 regulars occupied the booths, nursing cups of coffee that had long gone cold. Danny moved between tables with practiced ease, his movements automatic after countless nights. Weight of his notepad felt heavier than usual in his apron pocket. Sarah, the morning waitress who'd come in early to say goodbye, watched him from behind the counter with red-rimmed eyes. You sure you can't find another place? She asked, her voice catching. Maybe that new place over on 5th? Danny shook his head, managing a small smile. Already tried. They want younger folks, different hours. He didn't mention the 3 interviews he'd had last week, all ending with polite rejections and awkward questions about the gaps in his employment history. Mel emerged from his office, his usual cheerful demeanor subdued. The old man's shoulders slumped as he approached Danny. Son, I wish things were different. You've been the best nightman I've ever had. I understand, Mel. You've earned your retirement. Danny's voice remained steady, though his hand tightened around the coffee pot he was holding. Thanks for everything over the years. The rest of the shift passed in a blur of quiet goodbyes and last orders. Even Ted, the grumpy truck driver who'd been coming in for years, left a $20 tip and a gruff, "Take care of yourself, Danny." By the time Danny clocked out for the last time, dawn was breaking over the horizon. He stood in the parking lot, keys in hand, looking at the faded sign that had been his anchor for the past 3 years. The letter M flickered weakly, as if saying its own goodbye. The drive home was quick in the early morning quiet. Danny's old pickup truck rumbled past closed shops and sleeping houses, the familiar route now feeling somehow final. As he pulled into the small lot of their trailer park, the first rays of sunlight caught something white on his door. His heart sank when he saw the official letterhead of Child Protective Services. With trembling fingers, he pulled the notice from where it had been taped, scanning the contents as his world seemed to tilt sideways. Inside his trailer, Danny read the letter again under the "Do Where" harsh kitchen light. The words jumped out at him. Concerns raised by school counselor. Unstable living conditions. Irregular work hours. Welfare check scheduled. And worst of all, potential removal pending compliance review. 1 week. They were giving him 1 week to prove he could provide a stable environment for Sophie. Danny glanced at the clock. 6:45 a.m. Sophie would be waking up soon. He quickly folded the letter and tucked it into his jacket pocket, then splashed cold water on his face. When he heard her bedroom door open, he forced a smile. "Daddy!" Sophie padded out in her favorite unicorn pajamas, her dark hair a mess of tangles. "Is this your last day at Mel's?" "Already done, princess." He scooped her up in a hug, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo. "But hey, I was thinking, how about we make this weekend special? Maybe visit that new park they opened across town?" Sophie's face lit up. "The one with the rocket ship climbing frame?" "That's the one." Danny set her down gently. "Now, how about some breakfast before school?" After dropping Sophie off, Danny spent the morning in front of his laptop, firing off job applications. Each submission felt like throwing a stone into a deep well. No sound, no response, just endless falling. The local hardware store. Position filled. The warehouse. Seeking candidates with recent experience. The security company. Overqualified. By afternoon, he'd submitted 15 applications. His phone remained silent, except for one automated rejection email. The CPS letter burned in his pocket like a hot coal. That evening, after Sophie was asleep, Danny sat on the edge of his bed and pulled out an old shoebox from under it. Inside, carefully wrapped in a faded cloth, lay his military medals. The brass and ribbon caught the dim light, each one a memory of service, sacrifice, and a life that seemed impossibly far away now. The Distinguished Service Medal, the Bronze Star, the Combat Action Badge, symbols of honor that couldn't help him keep a roof over his daughter's head or food on their table. Danny ran his fingers over the cool metal, remembering the weight of responsibility he'd carried as force commander. He'd led men through impossible situations, made decisions that saved lives, earned commendations that now gathered dust in a shoebox. His hand trembled as he lifted the Bronze Star, awarded for the very mission that had eventually driven him from service. The medal that reminded him of Thompson's sacrifice, of the choices that still haunted his dreams. "What good are you now?" he whispered to the silent medals, his voice barely audible in the quiet room. The words hung in the air, unanswered, while somewhere in the distance, a train whistle cut through the night. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel driveway of Danny's trailer as General Holloway's polished black SUV pulled up. Danny had just finished getting Sophie onto the school bus, and his cholera, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. He hadn't slept well, the CPS letter haunting his dreams. The general stepped out, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee from the local cafe. His dress was casual today, khakis and a polo shirt, but his military bearing remained unmistakable. He approached the trailer's rickety steps with purpose. "Thought you could use this," the general said, extending one of the cups. "It's better than that diner sludge you've been drinking." Danny accepted the coffee with a quiet, "Thank you, sir." The rich aroma was indeed a far cry from Mel's burnt offerings. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the morning birds providing background chatter. "Mind if we talk inside?" the general asked, gesturing to the trailer door. Danny hesitated, embarrassment flickering across his face. The trailer wasn't much. Mismatched furniture, worn carpet, but spotlessly clean. Sophie's artwork covered the walls like wallpaper, bringing color to the dated paneling. "It's not much, but—" Danny started. "Son, I've slept in foxholes." The general cut him off. This is the home of a father doing his best. Inside, they sat at the small kitchen table. Sophie's half-eaten breakfast bowl still sat in the sink. Her backpack had left its usual trail of glitter on the floor. The general took it all in, with shrewd eyes. "I'll cut to the chase," he said, setting down his coffee. "I run a veterans community center on the east side of town, place called New Horizons. We need someone to manage the grounds and handle security. The pay's decent, hours are regular, and it comes with health benefits." Danny's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but before you say no," the general interrupted, "hear me out. This isn't charity. I've seen your file. You've got the skills we need. The place has grown, and I'm too old to handle everything myself anymore." Danny stood up, pacing the small kitchen. "My record is clean." "The record," General stated firmly. "And even if it wasn't, you'd still be the right man for this job. Those men and women at the center, they need someone who understands, someone who's been there." The morning light caught the dust motes dancing in the air as Danny considered the offer. His mind went to the CPS letter, to Sophie's smile, to the dwindling funds in his account. "When would you need me to start?" he asked finally. "Today, if you can. I'll show you around, introduce you to everyone." An hour later, Danny found himself walking through the doors of New Horizons Veterans Center. The building was a converted warehouse, but someone had put real thought into making it welcoming. Natural light streamed through skylights, and the walls were painted in warm earth tones. A few veterans milled about, some playing chess, others reading or chatting over coffee. "Morning, General," called out a cheerful voice. A black man in his 60s wheeled himself over, his right leg missing below the knee. Despite this, his smile was infectious. "Who's the new face?" "Reggie. Meet Danny Morales. He's our new facilities manager," the general said. "Danny, this is Reggie Sims. He practically lives here. Someone's got to keep this place running while the general plays golf," Reggie quipped, extending his hand to Danny. As they shook hands, a crash came from the storage room, followed by Reggie's muttered curse. "Those dang boxes of donations. Been trying to get them on the top shelf all morning." Without hesitation, Danny moved toward the storage room. "Let me help with that." "Now hold on," Reggie protested, wheeling after him. "I don't need." But Danny was already assessing the situation. The boxes weren't heavy, but they needed to go on a shelf well above wheelchair height. Instead of just doing it himself, Danny pulled up a chair. "If you can hand them to me one at a time, I'll place them," he suggested quietly. "Faster, with 2 people." Reggie's face softened with understanding. Together they made quick work of the task, with Reggie organizing the boxes and Danny placing them carefully on the high shelf. "You're all right, Morales," Reggie said when they finished. "Most folks just try to do everything for me. You're the first one who thought to make it a team effort." Throughout the day, Danny learned the layout of the center, met more veterans, and began making mental notes about security improvements. The work felt purposeful, and for the first time in weeks, the tension in his shoulders began to ease. That evening, Danny picked up Sophie from their neighbor's house. Over dinner, simple sandwiches but made with care, he told her about his new job. "Does this mean you won't have to work at night anymore?" Sophie asked, her eyes bright with hope. "That's right, sweetheart. I'll be home every evening." Sophie watched him closely as he described the center and the people he'd met. "Daddy," she said suddenly, "you're smiling. Like, really smiling." Touched his face, surprised to find she was right. He hadn't realized it himself. Sophie got up from her chair and wrapped her arms around him in a fierce hug. "I like it when you smile," she whispered into his shirt. "It makes your eyes look happy, too." Danny held her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling for the first time in a long while that maybe things would work out after all. The community center's meeting room felt both welcoming and intimidating as Danny stepped inside that Thursday evening. Folding chairs formed a circle under fluorescent lights, and the smell of fresh coffee wafted from a corner table. A dozen veterans of various ages were already settled in, some nodding at him in recognition from his work around the grounds earlier that week. General Holloway stood near the entrance, his presence commanding yet gentle. "Glad you could make it, Danny," he said, gesturing to an empty chair. "No pressure. Just listen if you want." Danny's hands were sweaty as he took his seat. He'd arranged for his elderly neighbor to watch Sophie for a few extra hours tonight, promising to bring home ice cream to make up for his absence. The vinyl chair squeaked under him as he shifted uncomfortably. Mike, a former Marine with graying temples, started the meeting. "Welcome, brothers. Same rules as always. What's said here stays here. No judgment, no interruptions." Danny watched as veterans shared their stories, one by one. A young man named Keith talked about jumping at loud noises. An older vet named Thomas described nightmares about Vietnam that still haunted him 50 years later. Their voices were steady but vulnerable, carved with pain and tinged with hope. "Danny," Mike said softly, "would you like to share? No pressure, but you're among friends here." The room fell silent. Danny felt the weight of their eyes, not demanding, but understanding. He cleared his throat, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was a force commander, Special Rescue Unit." He paused, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. We had a mission. Humanitarian extraction." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Danny continued. "My teammate, Jack. We'd served together for years. He was like a brother." Danny's voice cracked slightly. "The intel was wrong. The situation changed. I made a call, and—" He stopped, his chest tight. An older vet named Ray leaned forward. "Take your time, son. We've all been there." Danny nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "Jack didn't make it out. I got the civilians to safety, but I lost him. I was supposed to protect my team. I failed." "You got the civilians out?" someone asked gently. "Yeah. 3 families. But Jack—" Danny's eyes burned. "He had a wife, 2 kids. I couldn't face them afterward, couldn't lead anymore, so I left." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with understanding. From his corner, General Holloway watched intently, his own eyes glistening. A veteran named Marcus spoke up. "Lost my best friend in Fallujah. Blamed myself for years." He leaned forward, his prosthetic leg visible below his shorts. "Still do sometimes. But being here, talking about it, it helps." Others shared similar stories. A medic who couldn't save his sergeant, a helicopter pilot who lost 2 crew members in a sandstorm. Each story echoed with the same guilt, the same pain, the same desperate need for redemption. "The hardest part," Danny continued, surprising himself by speaking again, "is trying to be a good father when you feel like you failed as a leader. My daughter, Sophie, she deserves better than a broken man." "You're not broken," Ray said firmly. "Wounded, maybe, but not broken. And you're here. That takes courage." General Holloway finally spoke from his position near the wall. "Leadership isn't about being perfect, Danny. It's about carrying on despite our failures, about using our pain to help others." The meeting continued, stories flowing like a gentle river of shared experience. Danny felt something shift inside him. Not healing exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. These men carried burdens like his own, yet they smiled, they lived, they found ways to keep going. As the meeting wound down, the veterans exchanged handshakes and quiet words of support. Several patted Danny's shoulder as they passed, a gesture that spoke volumes in its simplicity. Outside, the night air was cool and clear. Danny stood in the parking lot, looking up at the vast expanse of stars scattered across the dark sky. The weight in his chest felt different now, still heavy, but somehow more bearable. "Maybe I'm not the only one," he whispered to the stars, feeling for the first time in years that he wasn't alone in his struggle. The morning sun cast long shadows across the community center's parking lot as Danny arrived for what he thought would be another regular day. General Holloway stood waiting by his polished black SUV. But he wasn't alone. Next to him was a woman in her mid-50s with steel-rimmed glasses and a warm smile. "Danny," the general called out, waving him over. "I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen, director of the Second Chance Youth Program." "Ma'am, the general here tells me you have quite a way with people," Sarah said, studying him with kind but searching eyes. "We're looking for mentors who can connect with our boys. Veterans especially tend to reach them in ways others can't." Danny shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the scrutiny. "I'm not sure I'm qualified." "You are," the general cut in firmly. "More than you know." Sarah led them inside to her office, where photos of smiling teenagers covered one wall. "Many of our boys come from broken homes or have been in trouble with the law. They need structure, discipline, and most importantly, someone who believes in them." Danny's eyes lingered on a group photo where several teens wore proud grins while holding up completion certificates. It reminded him of his own unit graduation photo, now buried in that shoebox with his medals. "We start with 3 afternoons a week," Sarah explained. "You'll work with a small group, focusing on life skills, teamwork, and academic support." Danny thought of Sophie's homework table, how her eyes had lit up when he finished building it. Maybe he could do that for others too. "I'll try," he said quietly. The following week found Danny in a stuffy classroom with 6 teenage boys who radiated defiance and disinterest. Among them was Marcus Hall, 15, with hard eyes and a permanent scowl. While the others fidgeted and whispered, Marcus stared straight ahead, challenging Danny silently. Instead of lecturing, Danny pulled out a rope and some basic climbing gear. "Anyone want to learn how to tie a proper rescue knot?" Curiosity overcame attitude, and soon the boys were gathered around, even Marcus drifting closer. Danny demonstrated the figure-8 follow-through, his hands moving with practiced precision. "This knot could save your life or someone else's," he explained. "But only if you do it right, every single time." Marcus picked up the technique quickly, his fingers surprisingly nimble. When Danny praised his work, a flicker of pride crossed the boy's face before he could hide it. Over the next few weeks, Danny introduced more practical skills: map reading, basic first aid, team communication exercises. He never raised his voice, never showed frustration when they tested his patience. Instead, he met their challenges with calm authority and genuine interest in their progress. Marcus began staying after sessions, asking questions about Danny's military service. Danny kept his answers simple but honest, and slowly the boy's tough exterior started to crack. "My teachers think I'm stupid," Marcus admitted one afternoon while practicing splint wrapping. "Say I won't graduate," Danny adjusted. Marcus's technique, gently. "Teachers said the same about me. Proved them wrong by graduating with honors." "Yeah?" Marcus's hands stilled. "How?" "Found something worth fighting for. Something bigger than myself." Danny met the boy's gaze steadily. "You're not stupid, Marcus. You just haven't found your fight yet." The next day, Marcus brought in his math homework and they worked through it together during break time. It became a regular thing. Marcus would arrive early or stay late, gradually improving his grades from F's to C's, then to B's. One Wednesday afternoon, Danny was demonstrating proper stance for a team-building exercise when Linda Carver from CPS walked in unannounced. His heart stuttered, but he kept his voice steady as he finished the instruction. "Officer Carver," he greeted her, aware of Marcus watching the interaction closely. "Mr. Morales." She glanced around the classroom, taking notes on her clipboard. "I thought I'd stop by and see how things are progressing." Danny led her back to his trailer afterward, where Sophie was already home from school, working at her new homework table. A solid pine creation Danny had built from scrap wood and determination. "Daddy made it just for me," Sophie announced proudly, showing off the smooth surface and perfectly level legs. "See? There's even a special drawer for my colored pencils." Linda examined the table, noting its sturdy construction and the careful attention to detail. She looked around the trailer too, at the organized school supplies, the weekly menu posted on the fridge, the neat stack of library books. "I see you've made some positive changes," she said, her professional facade softening slightly. "The youth program? That's new?" "Yes, ma'am. 3 afternoons a week, plus some Saturdays for special activities." She made another note. "And Sophie? Mrs. Rodriguez next door watches her until I get home. We do homework together every day, and she's joining Girl Scouts next month." Linda's pen paused. "That's good. Very good, Mr. Morales. Keep this up, and I think we'll be seeing less of each other." After she left, Danny sat heavily in his kitchen chair, relief making his hands shake. Sophie climbed into his lap, just like when she was smaller. "Did I do good, Daddy?" He hugged her tight. "You did perfect, sweetheart. Just perfect." The following morning, an envelope waited in Danny's mailbox. Inside was a formal letter from Sarah Chen, offering him a permanent position with the Second Chance program. Full-time, benefits, regular hours. Danny stood in his kitchen, holding the letter with trembling fingers, reading it over and over. The paper felt fragile, like it might dissolve if he gripped it too hard. Like so many good things in his life, it seemed too precious to be real. The salary wasn't huge, but it was steady. The hours would let him be home for Sophie every evening. And most importantly, it was a chance to serve again, to lead again, to make a difference in young lives that needed guidance, just as he had once needed it. He carefully set the letter on the table, Sophie's homework table, and traced his fingers over the letterhead, making sure it was real, making sure it wouldn't vanish like morning mist in the sun. 2 weeks had transformed the community center. Red, white, and blue bunting decorated the walls, and folding chairs filled the main room. The usual scent of coffee and donuts mixed with the aroma of fresh-baked cookies that the veterans' wives had brought. People filtered in, veterans, families, and community members, their chatter creating a warm buzz in the air. Danny stood at the back, tugging at his collar. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a crisp blue button-down shirt and khakis. His hands felt empty without a dish towel or gardening tools to hold. "Daddy!" Sophie bounced on her toes beside him, clutching a piece of paper that was now wrinkled from her nervous fingers. She wore her favorite, yellow dress, the one with tiny daisies around the hem. "What if I mess up?" Danny knelt down to her level, straightening the butterfly clip in her dark hair. "You won't mess up, sweetheart. But even if you do, I'll still be proud of you." The general appeared beside them, looking distinguished in his blazer. "There's my favorite writer," he said, giving Sophie a grandfatherly wink. "Ready to share your masterpiece?" Sophie nodded, but her grip on the paper tightened. Danny noticed her hands trembling slightly and placed his steady hand on her shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah Chen's voice carried through the microphone, "welcome to our community center open house. We have a special presentation tonight from one of our youngest supporters." The crowd settled into their seats. Danny gave Sophie a gentle nudge forward. She walked to the small platform, her Mary Jane shoes clicking against the wooden floor. The microphone stand towered over her until Sarah adjusted it. Sophie unfolded her paper, smoothing it carefully. Her voice started soft but grew stronger with each word. "My Daddy is My Force Commander" by Sophie Morales. Danny's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't known the title of her essay. "A force commander is someone who leads special missions to help people," Sophie read. "My daddy used to be one, but now he commands our home instead of soldiers. He makes sure I eat breakfast every morning and checks under my bed for monsters every night." Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Danny saw several veterans nodding, their own children beside them. He shows me how to be brave when I'm scared, like when there's thunder. He shows me how to be kind, like when we help Mrs. Rodriguez carry her groceries. He shows me how to work hard, even when things are tough. The general stood straighter, his eyes glistening behind his glasses. Sometimes people look at where we live, or Daddy's jobs, and feel sorry for us. But they don't understand. We have everything we need because we have each other. Daddy says that's what being a commander means, taking care of your people no matter what. Danny blinked rapidly, his vision blurring. A veteran's wife dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My daddy doesn't wear a uniform anymore, but he's still a hero. He's my hero. He protects me from bad dreams and teaches me to be strong. He works really hard so I can have good things, like my books and my special pencils for drawing. Sophie's voice grew more confident. Now Daddy helps other people at the community center too. I see him smile more. The other kids here say he's teaching them good things, just like he teaches me. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word from the little girl at the microphone. I know Daddy misses his old team sometimes. He gets sad when he thinks I'm not looking. But I want him to know that we're a new team now. Me and him and all our friends here. And he's still the best commander ever. Sophie looked directly at Danny. I love you, Daddy. Thank you for being my force commander. The applause was immediate and thunderous. The general's clapping boomed above everyone else's, his usual military restraint forgotten. Tears streamed freely down weather-worn faces throughout the room. Danny opened his arms as Sophie ran to him. He lifted her up, holding her close, not caring who saw his own tears. That was beautiful, baby girl, he whispered into her hair. The crowd surrounded them with congratulations and kind words, but Danny barely heard them. His world had narrowed to the precious weight in his arms, his daughter who saw him not as he saw himself, broken and struggling, but as her protector, her teacher, her hero. Later that night, Danny tucked Sophie into bed. Her essay sat proudly on her nightstand, next to a framed photo of them at the park. Did you really like my essay, Daddy? She asked sleepily. Danny sat on the edge of her bed, smoothing her blanket. I loved it, Sophie. It was the best thing I've ever heard. She yawned, her eyes already heavy. Are you happy now? At the center? I am, he said, realizing it was true. And I promise you, I'm not going anywhere. We're a team, remember? The best team, she murmured, drifting off to sleep. Danny kissed her forehead and quietly left her room. He stepped out onto their small porch, settling into the old wooden chair. The night was clear, and the moon hung full and bright in the sky, casting silver light across their humble yard. For the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. The memories of his past, the failed mission, the loss of his teammate weren't gone, but they no longer threatened to crush him. Here, in this moment, everything finally felt okay. He could hear crickets chirping, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of jasmine from Mrs. Rodriguez's garden next door. Danny leaned back in his chair, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. The moon's gentle light seemed to bless their little trailer, their simple life, and the love that made it all worthwhile. The morning sun filtered through the community center's windows as Danny demonstrated proper push-up form to a group of teenagers. Marcus, now his star student, counted out loud for the others. Danny's phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't recognize the number, but stepped aside to answer it, keeping one eye on the boys. Morales speaking, he said, his voice steady and professional. Force Commander Morales. The voice on the other end was smooth, practiced, and hauntingly familiar. Colonel Braxton here. Long time, old friend. Danny's hand tightened on the phone. The room suddenly felt colder, and his throat went dry. Colonel, he managed to say, I'm in town for a few days. Think we should catch up. It wasn't a request. I hear you're working with troubled youth now. How? Fitting. Before Danny could respond, Braxton continued, I'll stop by your center today. Around noon, we have some unfinished business to discuss. The line went dead. Danny stared at his phone, his chest tight. Marcus noticed his change in demeanor and jogged over. You okay, Mr. M? The teen asked, concern in his dark eyes. Danny forced a smile. Fine, Marcus. Let's get back to it. The morning crawled by like molasses. At 11:45, Danny spotted General Holloway's car pulling into the parking lot. He hadn't called him, but somehow the older man seemed to know when he was needed. You look like you've seen a ghost, the general said, studying Danny's face. Colonel Braxton's coming here, Danny replied quietly. The general's expression darkened. That pompous jackass? Why now? Before Danny could answer, a sleek black SUV pulled into the lot. Colonel Braxton stepped out, his uniform pressed to perfection, his chest heavy with medals. Two other officers flanked him. The colonel strode into the center like he owned it, his boots clicking on the floor. The teenagers stopped their activities, sensing the tension in the room. Well, Braxton announced, his voice carrying. The mighty force commander, reduced to babysitting juvenile delinquents. These are good kids, Danny said evenly. And this is private property. Oh, I'm aware. Braxton's smile was razor sharp. Just like I'm aware of how you abandoned your team in Kandahar, left good men to die while you played hero. The room went deadly quiet. Marcus and the other teens stared between Danny and the colonel. That's not what happened, Danny said, his voice low but firm. No? Braxton stepped closer. Then explain why you refused your commendation, why you ran away instead of facing a review board, why Private Jenkins died under your command. Danny's fists clenched. You know damn well what happened that night. You gave the order. I've got signed statements from 3 officers contradicting your version of events. Braxton cut him off. The youth board might be interested in knowing they hired a man who cracked under pressure. Who knows when it might happen again? General Holloway stepped forward, his face red with anger. That's enough, Braxton. You're way out of line. Stay out of this, Frank, Braxton snapped. Your retirement doesn't give you jurisdiction here. 2 hours later, Danny sat in the youth program director's office, staring at a suspension letter. Pending investigation into concerning allegations about your military service, it read. His phone buzzed again. This time it was Linda Carver, from CPS. Mr. Morales. Her voice was clinical, professional. In light of recent developments and concerns about your stability, we're implementing temporary emergency custody of Sophie. The world tilted sideways. No, Danny whispered. Please, you can't. A caseworker will pick her up from school today. You'll be notified of the hearing date. Danny barely remembered driving to the courthouse. General Holloway met him there, but it was too late. The emergency order had already been signed. Through the courthouse windows, Danny watched a social worker lead Sophie to a car. His daughter looked so small, clutching her backpack, tears streaming down her face as she called for him. Daddy! Please don't let them take me. Danny took a step forward, but the general's hand on his shoulder stopped him. The older man warned, It'll only make things worse. Sophie's face pressed against the car window as it pulled away. Danny's legs gave out, and he collapsed against the general, who caught him in a fierce embrace. I lost her again. Danny choked out, his body shaking with silent sobs. First her mother, now this. The general held him tighter, his own eyes wet. Around them, people walked past on the courthouse steps, averting their gazes from the broken man and his old soldier friend. General Holloway stood in the empty trailer, his weathered hands gripping Danny's kitchen counter. Days had passed since Danny vanished. The dishes from Sophie's last breakfast still sat in the sink, a stark reminder of how quickly everything had fallen apart. "Damn it, Morales," he muttered, scanning the small space for any clue he might have missed. Danny's military precision was evident even in his absence. The bed was made, Sophie's homework was neatly stacked, and a note to the neighbor about collecting mail sat on the counter. But there was nothing to indicate where he'd gone. The general pulled out his phone and dialed Danny's number for the 100th time. Straight to voicemail. Again. Outside, rain peppered the trailer's metal roof. The general climbed into his pickup truck, his joints protesting the movement. He'd already checked the usual places: the park where Danny took Sophie, the church, even the closed-down Mel's Diner. Nothing. At the Veterans Center, Reggie wheeled himself up to the general's office. "Any word?" "Not a peep," the general replied, rubbing his tired eyes. "He's gone dark. Military dark. He's hurting, sir," Reggie said softly. "Losing Sophie like that, it would break any man." The general nodded, remembering Danny's face outside the courthouse. He'd never seen someone look so utterly destroyed. Days turned into a week. The general called in favors, checked security cameras, and questioned everyone who might have seen Danny. The youth center kids missed their mentor. Marcus stopped showing up for sessions entirely. On the 8th day, while driving the back roads for the 3rd time, something clicked in the general's mind. Years ago, when he'd first established the veterans program, they'd used an old hunting cabin for wilderness therapy sessions. It was off the grid, hard to find unless you knew where to look. The cabin sat deep in the woods, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that looked more like a deer trail. The general's truck struggled over the rutted path as afternoon shadows lengthened between the trees. He found the cabin empty, but there were signs of recent occupation. Fresh wood ash in the fireplace, a worn blanket carefully folded on the single cot. On the simple wooden table, a coffee mug still held the dregs of what must have been that morning's coffee. "You're here somewhere, son," the general whispered to the empty room. Inside the cabin, Danny had spent his days in silent reflection. The solitude reminded him of his training days. Just him and his thoughts, stripped of all distractions. He'd brought nothing but his old military pack and the shoebox containing his medals. During his second night there, while sorting through the box, he'd found something he'd forgotten about. A letter, creased and worn at the edges. It was from Maria, his fallen teammate's widow, dated 6 months after the failed mission. Danny sat on the cabin's front porch, reading the letter for the 20th time in the fading light. "Dear Commander Morales, they told me what really happened that day. How you and Jack stayed behind to evacuate the children from the school, even after receiving orders to pull out. How you carried 3 kids to safety while under fire. Jack always said you were the finest officer he'd ever served with, and now I understand why. He died doing what he believed in, just like you taught him, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Don't carry this burden alone. You're a hero, whether you believe it or not. With gratitude." Maria. Danny's hands trembled as he folded the letter. All these years, he'd focused on what he'd lost that day, not what he'd saved. He'd carried the weight of Jack's death like a stone around his neck, drowning in guilt while pushing away any suggestion that he'd done something honorable. The cabin had no electricity, no distractions, just silence and memories. Danny spent hours watching the sun move across the wooden floor, thinking about Sophie, her smile when she mastered a math problem, her determination to save every stray animal she found, her unwavering belief in him, even when he couldn't believe in himself. On the 10th day, Danny stood at the cabin's single window, watching dawn break through the trees. The morning light painted everything in soft gold, reminding him of Sophie's hair. He thought about the kids at the youth center, about Marcus, who reminded him so much of himself at that age. He thought about the general, who'd offered him a chance when everyone else saw only damaged goods. The weight he'd carried for so long felt different now. Not gone, but transformed, like a heavy pack that, while still substantial, had been properly adjusted to sit more comfortably on his shoulders. Danny walked to where he'd hidden his phone, powered it on, and dialed the general's number. It rang only once. "Danny?" The general's voice was gruff with concern. Danny took a deep breath, looking around the cabin one last time. "I'm ready to come home." The silence on the other end stretched for a moment before the general spoke again, his voice softer now. "Where are you, son?" "The old therapy cabin," Danny replied. "I remembered it from the program files." "Stay put," the general said. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. He paused, then added, "It's good to hear your voice, Force Commander." Danny sat on the cabin's front steps, his pack at his feet, watching the morning mist rise from the forest floor. For the first time in days, he felt the fog in his own mind beginning to lift as well. The community center's main hall buzzed with tension. General Holloway had arranged every detail meticulously, from the neat rows of folding chairs to the small podium at the front. Local news cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking steadily. City council members sat in the front row, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The general stood ramrod straight at the podium, his voice carrying authority earned through decades of service. "We're here today to set the record straight about Force Commander Danny Morales and the events of Operation Safe Haven." Colonel Braxton sat near the front, his perfectly pressed uniform and polished medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. A smug smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Our first witness," the general announced, "is combat medic James Wheeler, who served directly under Commander Morales during the operation in question." A tall man with graying temples walked to the front. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edges of the podium, but his voice was clear and strong. "We were tasked with evacuating a small village before an artillery strike," Wheeler began. "Commander Morales discovered there were still civilians in the danger zone, women and children hiding in cellars. Colonel Braxton ordered us to proceed with the timeline anyway." Wheeler's jaw tightened, but Commander Morales refused to leave them behind. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Braxton's smile faltered. "He split our team," Wheeler continued, "half to escort the main group to safety, half to search for stragglers. We found 23 civilians, including 12 children." Wheeler's voice cracked. "We lost Sergeant Phillips during the extraction, but those families lived." The general nodded solemnly and called his next witness, a local veteran who'd been attending Danny's mentoring sessions at the youth center. "My son was spiraling," the man testified, his voice thick with emotion. "Getting into fights, skipping school. Commander Morales didn't just talk to him, he listened. Showed him respect. My boy's back in school now, making plans for college." More testimonies followed. Veterans whose lives Danny had touched, youth program staff who'd seen his impact firsthand, even Sophie's teacher speaking about his dedication as a father. Then came the moment the general had waited for. He pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. "This letter," he announced. "Marshal, Commander Morales' original superior officer, before his retirement. It was never delivered." He began to read. "Commander Morales exemplifies the highest principles of leadership and moral courage. During Operation Safe Haven, he faced an impossible choice between following orders and saving innocent lives. He chose humanity over protocol, shouldering the full weight of that decision. In doing so, he displayed the kind of ethical leadership our military must strive to uphold. While we lost a good man that day, we saved 23 civilians who would have certainly perished. Commander Morales' actions deserve commendation, not condemnation." Colonel Braxton stood abruptly, his face flushed. "This is a farce. That operation was a failure. Indication." "That operation," the general cut in, his voice sharp as steel, "exposed your willingness to sacrifice innocent lives for the sake of a timeline. Commander Morales' choice that day saved not only those civilians but the very honor of our service." The general turned to address the gathered crowd directly. Colonel Braxton filed false reports about that day. He buried Colonel Marshall's letter and engineered Commander Morales's quiet dismissal to protect his own career. These are not the actions of a leader worthy of the uniform he wears.
The room erupted in shocked whispers. Camera flashes lit up the space as reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks.
Colonel Braxton's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. The director of the youth program rose from his seat. In light of this evidence, we are not only reinstating Commander Morales, but offering him a permanent position as our Director of Youth Leadership Development. Applause broke out, growing louder as more people joined in. Colonel Braxton stormed toward the exit, reporters trailing in his wake, shouting questions about his impending investigation. The general allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction before making one final announcement. "And there's someone else who would like to join us." He gestured toward the door. Danny stood there, looking tired, but steady. His eyes scanned the room, searching. Then the side door burst open, and Sophie came running in from the general's car where she'd been waiting. Her sneakers squeaked against the linoleum floor as she sprinted toward her father. "Daddy!" she cried out. Danny dropped to his knees, catching her as she launched herself into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair as tears streamed down both their cheeks. The room faded away around them. All the cameras, the witnesses, the vindication, none of it mattered as much as this moment. "I missed you so much," Sophie whispered, her small fingers clutching his shirt.
"I missed you too, baby girl."
Danny's voice was hoarse with emotion.
"I'm so sorry."
"I'm never leaving you again." They stayed like that, father and daughter clinging to each other, while the room full of witnesses dabbed at their eyes, watching love and justice triumph in equal measure. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Danny's trailer as he and Sophie carried in another box of groceries from their front steps. The community's outpouring of support had turned their small porch into a makeshift food bank. Casseroles, fresh vegetables, and home-baked bread filled every available surface. "Look, Daddy!" Sophie held up a bright yellow card decorated with glitter and marker hearts. "It's from my whole class." Danny's throat tightened as he read the messages inside. Simple words from third graders saying how much they missed Sophie and were glad she was home. He placed it carefully on their crowded kitchen counter, next to vases of flowers and stacks of cards from veterans, church members, and neighbors they barely knew. "We're gonna need a bigger fridge," Danny said, trying to reorganize the stuffed shelves. Sophie giggled, reaching up to help him Tetris another container of Mrs. Anderson's famous lasagna into place. The following weeks unfolded slowly, like a flower opening to the sun. Danny found his rhythm at the community center, leading morning workshops where veterans could share their stories in a safe space. He recognized the haunted looks in their eyes, the same one he'd carried for so long, and showed them there was hope on the other side of pain. During one session, an older vet named Mike broke down while describing a firefight in Vietnam. Danny knelt beside him, one hand on his shoulder, and waited in respectful silence until Mike could continue. The other men nodded in understanding, creating a circle of solidarity around their wounded brother. "You're not alone anymore." Danny told him quietly, "None of us are." The youth mentoring program flourished under Danny's guidance. He started a leadership training course, teaching teenagers the same skills that had kept his unit alive: teamwork, discipline, and looking out for each other. Marcus, the troubled teen he'd connected with earlier, became his unofficial assistant. "You see that kid there?" Danny asked Marcus one afternoon, pointing to a newcomer hanging back from the group. "He reminds me of you when you first started. Why don't you show him around?" Marcus straightened his shoulders, pride evident in his stance. "Yes, sir." When Sophie's teacher invited Danny to give a presentation on courage to her class, he almost declined. But Sophie's eager face convinced him. He stood before 25 wide-eyed third graders, telling carefully edited stories about rescue missions and the true meaning of bravery. Being brave doesn't mean you're never scared, he explained, meeting each child's gaze. It means doing what's right, even when you are scared. After school, Sophie wrapped her arms around his waist. You're the bravest person I know, Daddy. The general became a frequent visitor to their home, often bringing takeout and staying for dinner. One evening, as Sophie did homework at her table, the older man pulled out his wallet and showed Danny a worn photograph. This is James, he said softly, touching the image of a young soldier in desert camo. My son, he loved basketball and terrible jokes. Used to drive his mother crazy, leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor. Danny listened as the general shared stories about James, childhood memories, teenage rebellions, their last conversation before his final deployment. The proud father's voice cracked occasionally, but he kept talking, as if each word released was a weight lifted from his heart. He would have liked you, the general said finally, carefully returning the photo to his wallet. Both of you. Danny squeezed the older man's shoulder, understanding the gift of trust he'd been given. I wish I could have met him. Their Friday night dinners became a tradition. Sophie started calling the general Grandpa Frank, and his stern face would soften every time she did. He taught her chess, brought her books, and listened with genuine interest to her dreams of becoming a veterinarian. You know, he told Danny one night as they watched Sophie concentrate on her next chess move, I never thought I'd have this again. Family. On a quiet Sunday evening, Danny found an old box of home videos while organizing closets. His hands trembled slightly as he put one in the DVD player. Sophie curled up on his lap as images flickered to life on the screen. There was Maria, his late wife, dancing in their kitchen while pregnant with Sophie. Her laugh filled their small living room, and Danny felt tears slide down his cheeks. But they weren't just tears of loss anymore. They were tears of gratitude for the beautiful life they'd shared and the amazing daughter they'd created together. Sophie's breathing grew steady and deep as she drifted off to sleep against his chest. Danny stroked her hair, watching Maria spin and smile on the screen. His heart felt full, not with the crushing weight of guilt and grief he'd carried for so long, but with love, hope, and the quiet joy of finally being at peace. A small smile curved his lips as he held his sleeping daughter, surrounded by the proof that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as its deepest wounds. The video played on, preserving precious moments of their past, while Danny and Sophie rested safely in their present, finally home in every way that mattered. The Memorial Day sun bathed Main Street in golden light as crowds gathered along the sidewalks. Red, white, and blue bunting draped from lampposts and storefront windows, while small American flags fluttered in the gentle breeze. The air buzzed with excitement and the smell of barbecue from vendor carts. Danny Morales stood beside his old trailer, adjusting the collar of his pressed blue shirt. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed down Sophie's sundress. You look beautiful, sweetheart, he said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Sophie beamed up at him. You look handsome too, Daddy. Like a real commander. A black SUV pulled up, and General Holloway stepped out, wearing his full dress uniform adorned with medals. His stern face softened at the sight of them. Ready for your big day, Force Commander? The general asked, placing a steady hand on Danny's shoulder. Danny swallowed hard. Sir, I don't deserve all this attention. That's exactly why you do, the general replied firmly. They drove to the parade staging area, where a decorated float waited. American flags and patriotic streamers covered its sides, and a banner across the front read, Honoring Our Heroes. The wooden platform had been transformed into a garden of red and white flowers. Sophie squealed with delight. It's like a princess carriage. As they climbed aboard, Danny noticed Marcus helping to arrange the last few decorations. The teenager had traded his usual hoodie for a crisp white shirt. When he saw Danny, he stood straighter. Looking sharp, Marcus, Danny called. Out. Thanks to you, sir, Marcus replied with a proud grin. He held up a large banner he'd been working on. The words "Welcome Home, Force Commander" were painted in careful strokes. The parade began moving down Main Street. Leading the procession was the high school marching band playing "America the Beautiful." Behind them came vintage military vehicles carrying older veterans. Then the float carrying Danny, Sophie, and the general. Sophie waved enthusiastically to the crowds. "Look how many people came, Daddy." Danny's throat tightened as he took in the scene. Families lined both sides of the street. Children sitting on parents' shoulders. American flags waved in hundreds of hands. But what struck him most were the veterans. Men and women in uniform, or wearing service caps, who stood at attention as the float passed. One by one, they raised their hands in salute. A World War II veteran in a wheelchair struggled to his feet, supported by his grandson to render honors. Vietnam. Vets nodded in solemn recognition. Young service members in fresh uniforms showed their respect. Behind the float, Marcus proudly carried his banner, flanked by other teens from the youth program. They marched in step, heads held high, transformed from troubled kids into a disciplined unit under Danny's guidance. The general leaned close to Danny. "Look at what you've built here, son. This isn't just about your past service. It's about what you're doing now." Danny watched as Sophie blew kisses to the crowd. His daughter's joy, so recently threatened, now shone like a beacon. The painful memories that had driven him into hiding seemed to lose their sharp edges in the warmth of this moment. The float passed the community center, where Danny now worked full-time. The veterans from his support group gathered on the steps, each one saluting. Reggie, the amputee vet Danny had helped on his first day, called out "Oorah," which was echoed by others in the crowd. Near the end of the parade, en route, Danny spotted his elderly neighbor who used to babysit Sophie. She wiped tears from her eyes as they passed. Next to her stood some of his former co-workers from Mel's Diner, cheering and holding up a hand-painted sign, "Our Hero." The parade concluded in the town square where a small stage had been set up. As Danny helped Sophie down from the float, reporters gathered around with cameras and microphones. The general stepped forward to field their questions. "General Holloway," one reporter called out, "what would you say was the highlight of today's parade?" The general's weathered face creased into a rare smile as he turned to where Danny stood with his arm around Sophie. "There's your real hero," he said simply, gesturing to Danny. "Not because of any medals or commendations, but because he shows us every day what true service looks like. He teaches our young people about honor, helps our veterans heal, and proves that the greatest acts of courage often happen right here at..." Danny felt Sophie's small hand slip into his C and squeeze tight. Marcus stood nearby, still holding his banner high, his face full of pride. All around them, the community that had embraced them, supported them, and fought for them, gathered close. The morning sun caught the general's medals as he faced the crowd, but his eyes remained fixed on Danny and Sophie. In that moment, surrounded by love and recognition, Danny finally felt the weight of his past lift from his shoulders. He was home. The evening settled over their small trailer like a warm blanket, bringing with it the peaceful quiet that follows a day of celebration. The Memorial Day parade's excitement still lingered in the air, but now Danny sat alone at their tiny kitchen table, illuminated by a single lamp. Sophie had fallen asleep an hour ago, worn out from the day's festivities. Danny's fingers traced the worn edges of a spiral notebook he'd found earlier while unpacking Sophie's belongings from foster care. Its cover was decorated with heart stickers and her name written in careful rainbow letters. He hadn't had the courage to open it until now. Taking a deep breath, he opened to the first page. Sophie's familiar childish handwriting filled the lines, slightly messy but full of determination. "Dear Daddy, today is my first night away from you. Mrs. Bennett is nice, but she's not you. I didn't cry at bedtime because I want to be brave, like you taught me. I know you'll fix everything soon." Danny's throat tightened as he turned to the next page. "Dear Daddy, I made a new friend today. Her name is Lisa. I told her all about you and how you're a hero who saves people. She said her dad left and never came back. I told her my daddy always comes back. Always. His vision blurred as he read entry after entry. Some were short, just a few sentences about her day. Others filled entire pages with her thoughts and feelings. Dear Daddy, today in art class, we had to draw our happy place. I drew our trailer with the string lights you put up and the little garden we started. Tommy laughed and said, trailers are for poor people. But I told him, our trailer is full of love, and that makes us rich. That's what you always say. Danny wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but the tears kept coming. Each page revealed how deeply Sophie had held on to her faith in him, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Dear Daddy, Mrs. Bennet asked if I was angry at you. I said no. How could I be angry? You're my force commander. That means you have to fight battles sometimes, but you always win. I know you're fighting for me right now. The next entry made his hands shake. Dear Daddy, I overheard Mrs. Bennet talking on the phone about you. She said you disappeared, but I know better. You're like a superhero, working undercover. You'll come back when it's safe. I knew you'd come for me, Daddy. I never doubted it for 1 second. Danny had to set the notebook down for a moment. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The pure, unwavering trust of his daughter overwhelmed him. While he'd been hiding in that cabin, tormented by guilt and fear, she'd never lost faith in him for a moment. After collecting himself, he continued reading, Dear Daddy, today I helped Mrs. Bennet make cookies. She let me take some to school. I saved one wrapped in a napkin under my pillow for when you come back. I know you love chocolate chip. Dear Daddy, in school today we learned about birds who always find their way home, no matter how far they fly. That's like you and me. We'll always find our way back to each other. The final entry was dated just days before the tribunal. Dear Daddy, the general visited today. He had that special twinkle in his eyes, like when he knows a good secret. He said to pack my things because I'd be going home soon. I told him. I already knew that. My daddy never breaks his promises. Danny closed the notebook gently, treating it like the precious treasure it was. His tears had dried, replaced by a profound sense of gratitude. His daughter's pure love and unshakable faith had been a light in the darkness. Even when he couldn't see it himself, he stood up and walked to the bookshelf, where he kept their family photo albums. Pulling out a new, empty album he'd bought recently, he grabbed a marker and wrote on its cover, Our Second Chance. The notebook would be the first thing to go inside, a testament to the power of his daughter's love and their unbreakable bond. The late summer breeze rustled through the ancient oak trees that formed a protective canopy over the military cemetery. Their leaves whispered secrets of seasons past, creating a gentle symphony that seemed fitting for this sacred ground. Danny Morales stood quietly beneath their shade, his weathered hands resting protectively on Sophie's narrow shoulders as they faced the polished granite headstone that gleamed in the morning light. General Holloway stood beside them like a sentinel, his weathered face etched with the kind of solemn respect that only came from understanding the true weight of loss. The morning sun climbed slowly over the horizon, casting long, dancing shadows across the endless rows of identical white markers. Each stone stood at perfect attention, telling its own story of sacrifice, service, and dreams cut short. The cemetery stretched out before them like a field of memories, immaculately maintained and profoundly peaceful. Danny's eyes fixed on the name etched deep into the stone before him, the letters carved with precision and care. Marcus Red Thompson, his fallen teammate from that fateful mission that had haunted his nightmares for years. Sophie clutched a single white lily in her small hands, its silky petals still decorated with diamonds of morning dew that caught the sunlight like tiny prisms. The flower trembled slightly in her grasp, not from nervousness but from the reverence she felt in this place where heroes rested. She looked up at her father with those wise eyes that seemed to hold understanding far beyond her 9 years, studying his face with the careful attention she'd learned to give when adults carried heavy burdens. Danny squeezed her shoulder gently, drawing strength from her warm presence. The simple touch grounded him, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this moment of remembrance. Red always had a joke ready, Danny said softly, his voice cutting through the reverent silence like a prayer. The words came slowly, carefully chosen. Even in the worst situations, even when everything seemed hopeless, he'd find something to smile about, something to help us all remember why we were fighting. His voice caught slightly on the memory, the weight of years threatening to overwhelm him. But he steadied himself and continued. He loved taking pictures of sunsets, carried that old camera everywhere, said they reminded him that every day, no matter how hard or dark it got, always had beauty hidden in it if you just knew where to look. The general nodded slowly, his own memories of lost comrades reflecting in eyes that had seen too much war and not enough peace. The lines around those eyes told stories of their own, of young men and women who'd never made it home, of families who'd sacrificed everything for freedom. Men like Red, he said, his voice gruff with barely controlled emotion. They're the ones who show the rest of us what true courage really looks like. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to do what's right despite it. Sophie listened intently, her young mind absorbing every word like precious treasure. She'd heard pieces of Red's story over the past months, fragments shared during quiet evening conversations when her father's guard was down. But standing here in this hallowed place, surrounded by the weight of sacrifice, made it all real in a way that simple words could never capture. Danny knelt slowly beside the headstone, his knees finding the soft earth that had been carefully tended by loving hands. He reached out with trembling fingers, running them over the engraved letters that spelled out his friend's name. The stone was cool to the touch, smooth and permanent, he admitted, his words barely rising above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the peace of this sacred ground. I thought I failed you, Red. Failed everyone who trusted me to bring them home safe. He took a deep, shuddering breath, steadying himself against the wave of emotion that threatened to pull him under. But you wouldn't have wanted that, would you? You always said leadership wasn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It was about doing what's right, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. The general moved closer, placing a firm, steady hand on Danny's shoulder. The gesture spoke volumes, understanding passing between two warriors who had walked similar paths of loss and redemption. Around them, the morning sun climbed higher, warming their backs as birds began their cheerful songs in the oak branches overhead. I promise you something today, Danny continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, gaining the authority that had once commanded respect on distant battlefields. I'm going to live the way you taught me to live. I'm going to lead with love, just like you did. Show integrity and kindness, even when it's the hardest thing in the world to do. He glanced up at Sophie, who watched him with the kind of unwavering trust that could move mountains. I'm going to be the kind of man you'd be proud to call brother. Sophie stepped forward then, with the careful dignity of a child who understood the importance of the moment. She knelt beside her father, carefully laying her white lily at the base of the headstone, where it seemed to glow against the dark granite. Her small voice carried clearly in the still, morning air, each word chosen with the wisdom that sometimes comes to children in moments of great truth. Thank you for helping my daddy come back to us, she said, her fingers touching the cold stone with gentle reverence. He helps other people now, just like you did when you were here. He makes them smile and feel safe. He teaches them to be brave. Danny's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't the bitter tears of pain that had haunted him for so long. These were different. Tears of pride and gratitude and overwhelming love for this remarkable child who had somehow found her way into his broken heart and helped heal it piece by piece. The general cleared his throat roughly, emotion making his usually commanding voice sound almost fragile. "Red would be mighty proud of both of you," he said, looking from father to daughter with the kind of approval that meant everything coming from a man like him. "The best way to honor our fallen brothers isn't with guilt or regret, it's to live well, to carry their spirit forward in how we treat others, how we love our families, how we serve our communities." Danny stood slowly, drawing Sophie close to his side where she belonged. The morning light had grown stronger now, catching the dewdrops that clung to every blade of grass and making them sparkle like countless tiny stars scattered across a green heaven. The cemetery was peaceful now, transformed in his mind from a place of crushing grief into something else entirely, a place of remembrance and hope, where love lived on beyond the boundaries of life and death. "You know," the general mentioned, allowing a small smile to soften his weathered features, "those kids at the youth center were asking about you yesterday when I stopped by. That basketball court you're helping them build, they're already planning tournaments and talking about starting a league." Danny's own smile came easier now, remembering the eager faces of his young charges and their boundless energy. "Red would have loved that," he said with genuine warmth. He was always saying we needed more places for kids to just be kids, to run and play and learn what it means to be part of something bigger than themselves. They began walking back along the neat, carefully maintained rows of white headstones, their footsteps creating a gentle rhythm on the gravel path that wound between the markers. Sophie's small hand found Danny's larger one, her fingers intertwining with his in the natural way of a child who trusted completely in her father's strength. The path led them past dozens of other graves, each one representing a story of service and sacrifice. Some were decorated with fresh flowers, others with small American flags that fluttered proudly in the morning breeze. Each marker was a reminder that freedom came at a cost, that the peace they enjoyed had been purchased with precious blood. "Daddy?" Sophie asked, her voice thoughtful in the way that always meant she was working through something important in her young mind. "Do you think I could be a commander too someday?" Danny looked down at his daughter, this remarkable child who had somehow helped him find his way back to life, who faced each new day with courage and compassion that put most adults to shame. He saw in her bright eyes the same spirit that made truly great leaders, unshakable kindness, quiet strength, and the kind of unwavering love that could change the world one heart at a time. A smile spread slowly across his face, reaching all the way to his eyes for the first time in years. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice filled with pride and absolute certainty, "you already are." The morning sun had risen fully now, painting the sky in shades of gold and blue that would have made Red reach for his camera. Their long shadows stretched behind them as they walked toward the cemetery gates, leaving the markers of sacrifice and service in their wake. Behind them lay the physical reminders of those who had given everything for others. But ahead of them lay something else entirely, something brighter and more beautiful than anything they could have imagined. The pain and guilt that had haunted Danny for so long no longer held power over him. The war that had raged in his heart had finally found its peace. Instead of darkness, there was hope now, shining as clearly and warmly as the summer sun that climbed steadily overhead, promising another beautiful day ahead. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Danny Morales, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.